Snow fell like static across the Sierra Nevada mountains. 8 Delta Force operators pressed their backs against frozen rock, ammunition running dangerously low. The enemy closed in from 3 sides, their voices echoing off the canyon walls.
All
Colonel
units,
James
target is
Wilson
in
whispered
sight.
to his
Hold your
men through
positions.
blood-flecked lips, "Situation Delta Zero. It's over." Taliban fighters shouted through the wind, "Americans, surrender now." Then, crack. A single rifle shot echoed from the opposite ridge. An enemy fighter dropped instantly, blood staining the white snow crimson. Another shot, then another. Each one impossibly precise, impossibly cold. Who was pulling that trigger? And why did this ghost appear at their darkest moment? Captain Sarah Blackwood adjusted the straps of her medical pack and checked her watch. 0347 hours. The Delta Force team had been moving through the Sierra Nevada mountains for 6 hours, their breath forming ice crystals in the thin air. At 32, Sarah was older than most of the operators she accompanied, but her slight frame and quiet demeanor made her nearly invisible among the hardened warriors. She wore standard-issue medical gear, a white cross armband over her combat fatigues, a bulky medic's pack filled with trauma supplies, and thick-rimmed glasses that constantly fogged in the mountain cold. To the Delta operators, she was just another piece of equipment they had to protect. Necessary but fragile. Useful but not tactical. "Why'd they saddle us with her on this op?" Sergeant Jack Davis whispered to his teammate, nodding towards Sarah as she struggled to keep pace through the snow. At barely 24, Davis was the youngest member of the team, still eager to prove himself among the elite operators. "Orders," Master Sergeant Marcus Ramirez replied with a shrug. His weathered face, creased by 15 years of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, betrayed no emotion. "Intel says there might be wounded hostages. Someone's got to patch them up." Sarah heard every word but said nothing. She'd learned long ago that the best way to survive in a man's world was to make herself indispensable through competence, not confrontation. When the team stopped for water breaks, she quietly distributed protein bars from her pack. When someone complained about the cold, she offered hand warmers. When equipment needed adjusting, her small hands proved surprisingly useful. But there were moments, fleeting glimpses that a trained eye might catch, when Dr. Sarah Blackwood became someone else entirely. Like when they had paused to study the valley below through binoculars, and she'd unconsciously positioned herself with clear sightlines in 3 directions. Or when she'd checked her M4 carbine with movements so fluid and practiced that even Ramirez, a 15-year veteran, had taken notice. "Doctor," Colonel Wilson had said during one such moment, "where'd you learn to handle a rifle like that?" Sarah had adjusted her glasses nervously. "Basic training, sir. Same as everyone else." But Wilson wasn't convinced. He'd led enough operations to recognize muscle memory when he saw it. Dr. Blackwood's hands moved over her weapon with the automatic precision of someone who'd done far more than basic marksmanship training. Still, he had bigger concerns than his medic's mysterious past. Their mission was time-sensitive. Neutralize Karim Zakayev, a former KGB operative turned terrorist leader who had acquired a portable nuclear device from old Soviet stockpiles. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance, a dozen fighters, maybe 15. Quick in, quick out, back to base before dawn. Sarah had heard that same optimistic intelligence assessment on dozens of operations. In her experience, minimal resistance usually meant, "We have no idea what we're walking into." She touched the silver medallion around her neck, a gift from retired Colonel William Wild Bill Morgan before this mission. Wild Bill, the legendary sniper from MAC-VSOG during the Cold War, now a 68-year-old unofficial military advisor who had trained some of America's deadliest shooters. He'd been like a father to Sarah since she was 12. After her real father, Bill's closest friend and fellow sniper, had died in a classified operation in the final days of the Cold War. "Accuracy is a gift, Sarah," Bill had told her when he first placed a rifle in her small hands. But knowing when to use it, that's wisdom. Wild Bill had trained her meticulously, starting with his old M40A1 rifle, the same model he'd carried in countless Cold War operations. He taught her ballistics, wind estimation, the Coriolis effect, and breathing techniques known only to elite shooters. By 16, Sarah could outshoot most military marksmen. By 20, she had joined a classified unit called Ghost Protocol, a team of elite snipers established in the late Cold War for impossible missions behind enemy lines. Then came Grozny, the mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. The day Sarah watched her entire team die in an ambush. The day she'd sworn never to take another life. For 7 years, she'd been just Dr. Blackwood, the quiet medic who kept everyone patched up and never caused trouble. But some skills never fade completely. They just wait, patient as mountain snow, for the moment when they're needed again. As the team prepared to move deeper into enemy territory, Sarah cinched her pack tighter and fell in line behind the operators. None of them suspected that walking quietly at the back of their formation was someone the intelligence community had once called Phantom Sierra, a legend they assumed had disappeared forever into the shadows of classified operations. Tonight, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. The valley looked peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness. A narrow canyon carved between two ridgelines with a cluster of stone buildings nestled at the bottom like pebbles in a stream bed. Colonel Wilson studied the target through his night vision scope, counting structures, identifying potential escape routes, calculating fields of fire. "Looks quiet," he murmured into his radio. "Maybe Intel got it right this time." The team began their descent, moving in a tactical column with Wilson on point and Sarah bringing up the rear. Snow muffled their footsteps, and the wind through the canyon covered any sound their equipment might make. They were ghosts in the darkness, invisible and deadly. That's when the world exploded. The first mortar round landed directly in their path, sending shrapnel screaming through the air and illuminating the canyon with orange flame. Before the echo faded, machine gun fire erupted from concealed positions on both ridgelines, a crossfire that turned their approach route into a killing field. "Ambush! Take cover!" Wilson shouted, diving behind a boulder as bullets cracked past his head. The Delta operators scattered for whatever protection they could find in the barren landscape. Rocks, depressions in the ground, anything that might stop a 7.62 mm round. But there wasn't much cover in the open canyon, and the enemy had chosen their positions well. Davis screamed as a burst of automatic fire caught him in the left leg, spinning him around and dropping him in the snow. Blood immediately began soaking through his pants, dark against the white ground. Sarah moved without thinking, combat medical training overriding every instinct for self-preservation. She low-crawled through the snow toward Davis, ignoring bullets that whined past her head with lethal precision. "Stay still!" she shouted, dragging him behind a large rock. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Pressure bandage, hemostatic agent, morphine for the pain. "You're going to be fine, Davis. Just another scar to impress the girls back home." But even as she worked, Sarah's tactical mind was assessing their situation with growing alarm. They were trapped in a canyon with enemy forces on the high ground, the worst possible position for any military unit. The fighters had clearly been waiting, possibly for hours or days, setting up interlocking fields of fire that covered every possible escape route. Wilson's voice crackled over the radio, trying to coordinate their defense. "Ramirez, can you get eyes on that machine gun position? Thompson, we need suppressive fire on the eastern ridge." But Sarah could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. They were outnumbered at least 5-1, pinned down in the open with wounded personnel and limited ammunition. Their radio calls for support were answered only by static. Either the mountains were blocking their signal, or the enemy was jamming their frequency. "Sir," Ramirez shouted from his position 30 meters away, "we've got movement on three sides. They're trying to flank us." Through the chaos of gunfire and shouted orders, Sarah heard something that made her blood run cold, the distinctive whine of incoming mortar rounds. She threw herself across Davis just as the shells exploded around their position, sending rock fragments and hot metal screaming through the air. When the smoke cleared, she could see blood running down Wilson's face from a shrapnel cut. Lieutenant Thompson was clutching his shoulder where a rock fragment had torn through his gear. Even Ramirez, the most experienced operator on the team, was firing his weapon with the rapid, desperate bursts of someone who knew they were running out of time. "We're not making it out of this," Davis whispered, his face pale from blood loss and shock. "They got us good, Doc." Wilson keyed his radio one final time. "Base, this is Razor Team. We are pinned down in grid 41S MD11234556. 8 souls, 3 wounded, taking heavy fire from prepared positions. Request immediate close air support." Static answered him. The colonel closed his eyes and spoke quietly into his radio, meant for his team but audible to Sarah. "Situation Delta Zero. It's over." That's when Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 7 years. The cold, calculating calm that had once made her one of America's most feared snipers. Her hand moved unconsciously to the medallion around her neck. Wild Bill's last gift. And she remembered his words from their final conversation before the mission. "One day, Sarah, you'll have to face your past. And when that day comes, I want you to be prepared." She looked at Davis bleeding in the snow, at Wilson accepting defeat for the first time in his career, at 7 of the finest soldiers she'd ever known about to die because they were in an impossible tactical situation. Sarah made her choice. Rising from behind their cover, she moved with purpose toward her medical pack, not for bandages or morphine, but for the equipment she'd hoped never to use again. Hidden beneath the trauma supplies, wrapped in waterproof cloth, was the reason she'd volunteered for this mission, despite having no business being here. Sometimes a medic's most important tool isn't meant for saving lives. Sometimes it's meant for taking them. Sarah's hands moved with muscle memory burned in by thousands of hours of training that most people never knew existed. From the bottom of her medical pack, beneath layers of bandages and surgical supplies, she extracted a weapon that had no business being in a medic's kit. The Macmillan TAC 338 sniper weapon system came apart in her hands like pieces of a familiar puzzle: stock, barrel, scope. Each component wrapped in protective cloth and assembled with mechanical precision. The 338 Lapua Magnum cartridges, capable of lethal accuracy beyond 2,500 meters, were sealed in a waterproof container. The Schmidt & Bender PMII 525x56 scope with integrated laser rangefinder clicked into place with satisfying finality. In less than 90 seconds, Dr. Sarah Blackwood disappeared, completely replaced by someone the intelligence community had once called Phantom Sierra. She'd carried a similar weapon through Georgia, Bosnia, and half a dozen classified operations that existed only in heavily redacted files. 47 confirmed kills, each one precisely placed, each one necessary to save lives that would have been lost without her intervention. But that was another lifetime, before she'd watched her entire team die in an ambush outside Grozny. Before she'd decided that taking lives, even to save others, was a burden she could no longer bear. Now, watching 8 of America's finest operators about to be slaughtered in a barren Sierra Nevada canyon, Sarah realized that some burdens were meant to be carried. She moved to the edge of their defensive perimeter, finding a position with clear sight lines across the valley. Snow provided natural camouflage, and the rocky outcropping gave her a stable shooting platform. Through her scope, the enemy positions became crystal clear. Machine gun nests, mortar teams, riflemen moving to flank her teammates. The first shot was the hardest. always. Sarah controlled her breathing, felt her heart rate slow, became one with the rifle in her hands. The Taliban fighter manning the PKM machine gun that had been shredding their position never knew what hit him. One moment, he was pouring fire into the rocks where the Americans were hiding. The next, he was falling backward into the snow, his weapons silent. The Delta operators stopped firing, confusion evident in their sudden stillness. "What the hell?" Wilson shouted. "Who made that shot?" But Sarah was already acquiring her second target, the mortar team that had been dropping high explosives around their position with deadly accuracy. The spotter was calling corrections into his radio when Sarah's bullet took him center mass, dropping him instantly. His partner turned to see what had happened, just in time to catch the follow-up shot. "Sniper!" one of the Delta operators yelled. "We've got friendly sniper support." Through her scope, Sarah watched enemy fighters beginning to panic. They'd been confident in their superior position and numbers, but now their advantage was evaporating with each precisely placed shot. They started abandoning their fighting positions, running for cover that didn't exist against a shooter they couldn't locate. She was methodical, professional, deadly. Each shot was calculated for maximum tactical effect, taking out crew-served weapons first, then targeting leaders coordinating the fighters, finally eliminating anyone threatening to flank her teammates. But the most remarkable thing about Sarah's shooting wasn't the accuracy, it was the economy. Unlike the spray-and-pray tactics of the enemy fighters, she never wasted ammunition. One shot, one kill, just as Wild Bill had taught her 20 years ago. Davis, despite his wound, managed to prop himself up enough to see Sarah in her shooting position. His jaw dropped as he watched the quiet medic who'd been handing out protein bars 12 hours ago systematically dismantling an entire enemy force with surgical precision. "Holy shit," he whispered. "Doc's a fucking sniper." Sarah encountered her first real challenge when the wind suddenly shifted direction as she was lining up her third shot. The bullet grazed the shoulder of an enemy fighter instead of striking his chest. She adjusted quickly, placing her follow-up shot perfectly despite the gusting crosswind. As she repositioned to avoid counter-sniper fire, a lesson learned painfully in Georgia, she slipped on snow-slicked rock. Her scope struck stone with enough force to knock it slightly out of alignment. Most shooters would have been finished. But Sarah made a rapid adjustment based on feel rather than mathematics. Wilson low-crawled to a position where he could see Sarah, and what he witnessed made everything click into place. The way she'd handled her rifle during equipment checks, her unconscious tactical positioning during rest stops, the fact that she'd volunteered for a mission that had no need for medical personnel. Through his binoculars, he could see a small tattoo on her left forearm that had been hidden by her sleeve. An eagle's wings wrapped around a rifle scope with Cyrillic text underneath. He'd seen that symbol before in classified briefings about black operations during the late Cold War. "Phantom Sierra," he whispered, the words barely audible over the sound of gunfire. "Jesus Christ, we're being saved by Phantom Sierra." Sarah heard him but didn't respond. She was locked in the zone that every elite sniper knew. The perfect state where breathing, heartbeat, and trigger control became one fluid motion. The enemy was down to half strength, their coordinated attack dissolving into panicked retreat. But she wasn't done yet. Through her scope, she spotted a figure directing the remaining fighters from behind a large boulder 800 meters away, a man whose bearing and command presence marked him as no ordinary fighter. As he turned to give orders, Sarah caught a glimpse of his face and felt her blood freeze. Karim Zakayev, the former KGB operative that Wild Bill had wounded but failed to kill in Afghanistan in 1989. The man responsible for her father's death. The terrorist now in possession of a portable nuclear device. Sarah adjusted her scope for the increased range, compensated for wind and elevation, and squeezed the trigger with the gentle pressure of someone stroking a lover's cheek. The shot was perfect. But at that exact moment, Zakayev moved. The bullet struck his shoulder instead of his heart, spinning him around but not killing him. Sarah watched through her scope as his men dragged him to safety, disappearing into a hidden tunnel entrance. The same outcome that had haunted Wild Bill for decades was now her burden too. In less than 15 minutes, Phantom Sierra had transformed an impossible tactical situation into a victory, but an incomplete one. The canyon that had been a death trap became a graveyard for those who had tried to ambush America's finest. As the last enemy fighter fled into the darkness, Sarah slowly lowered her rifle and looked at her hands. The same hands that had been treating Davis's wound just minutes before. They weren't shaking. They were steady as stone. Some skills, she realized, never truly fade. They just wait for the moment when they are needed most. Wilson approached Sarah's position as she methodically cleaned her rifle, the same way she'd cleaned medical instruments after treating the wounded. Every movement precise, economical, practiced. He could see the tattoo on her forearm now, an eagle's wings wrapped around a rifle scope with text in what looked like Russian or Serbian. Below that, barely visible, were small marks that Wilson recognized as kill tallies, far more than should have been on any medic's arm. "Phantom Sierra," he said quietly. Not a question, but a statement of recognition. Sarah looked up, her eyes meeting his for the first time since the shooting had started. Behind her glasses, Wilson saw something he'd never noticed before. The 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much combat, too much death, too many impossible decisions. "That's not who I am anymore," she said softly, beginning to disassemble her weapon. Wilson studied her face, noting the way her hands moved over the rifle with unconscious familiarity. "Maybe not, but it's who we needed you to be tonight." Sarah didn't respond. She was already transforming back into Dr. Blackwood, the quiet medic who handed out protein bars and patched up wounded soldiers. But Wilson had seen behind the mask now, and he knew he'd never look at her the same way again. Neither would any of the men she'd just saved. The canyon fell silent except for the whisper of wind through rock and the distant sound of fleeing vehicles. Sarah had finished reassembling her medical pack, the TAC 338 once again hidden beneath layers of trauma supplies as if it had never existed. To any casual observer, she was just Dr. Blackwood again, the quiet medic with thick glasses and gentle hands. But the 8 Delta operators who'd witnessed her transformation would carry that memory for the rest of their lives. "Final count?" Wilson asked as his men secured the area. 14 confirmed KIA, no wounded," Ramirez reported, his voice filled with professional admiration. "Perfect shooting, every single round. I've never seen anything like it." Davis, propped against a rock while Sarah checked his bandages, stared at her with something approaching religious awe. "Doc, who are you really?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was focused on his wound, checking circulation, ensuring the field dressing would hold until they reached proper medical facilities. But Wilson could see the conflict in her eyes, the weight of returning to a life she'd tried to leave behind. "I'm someone who used to be very good at something I didn't want to be good at," she said finally. "Someone who thought she could walk away from that part of herself." "But you didn't walk away tonight," Thompson observed, cradling his injured shoulder. "You saved all our lives." "I did what needed to be done." Sarah's voice was steady, clinical. Nothing more, nothing less. But it was more than that, and everyone in the canyon knew it. The team's radios suddenly crackled to life. The jamming had stopped. Wilson reported their situation to base, requesting immediate extraction for the wounded. In the midst of his transmission, the radio intercepted a fragment of enemy communication. "Tell Phantom Sierra she missed her chance, like her father missed, like Morgan missed. Now America pays the price." Zakayev had survived, and he still had the nuclear device. Sarah's face hardened as she heard the transmission. 7 years of running from who she was had come to an end. She knew what had to happen next. Back at base, Sarah made a secure call to a number few people knew existed. Wild Bill Morgan answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. "You knew he would be there," Sarah said without preamble. "You knew Zakayev would be leading this operation personally." The silence on the other end confirmed her suspicion. "I knew it was a possibility," Bill finally admitted, his voice gravelly from decades of whiskey and cigars. "There are circles that need closing, Sarah. Your father couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. But you have the skill to finish what we started." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 3 generations of snipers converging on her shoulders. "He recognized me, called me out by name. He knows who I am, Bill." "He's always known," Bill replied. "Just as he's always known about me, about your father. It's been a 30-year game of chess between us, and now we're in the end game." Sarah understood now why Bill had insisted she take this mission, why he'd given her the medallion with the hidden compartment containing the microdot with Zakayev's complete file, information too sensitive to exist in any database. "He's wounded but alive," she said, "and he still has the device." "Then you know what has to happen next," Bill said. "The intelligence community believes he's heading to the Roosevelt Dam. If he detonates the device there, the radiation will contaminate the water supply for millions of Americans." Sarah felt the calm certainty that had defined her earlier career returning. "I'll need a team." "Wilson and his men have already been briefed," Bill said. "They're waiting for you. One more thing, Sarah. Check your locker. Left something you might need." When the call ended, Sarah went to her assigned quarters and opened her locker. Inside was a small wooden box she recognized immediately. Wild Bill's personal ammunition case. Inside lay a single .338 Lapua Magnum round with Cyrillic engraving on the casing. A note accompanied it. "This was your father's. He was saving it for Zakayev in Afghanistan. It's been waiting 35 years to complete its journey. Make it count." Sarah slipped the round into her pocket, feeling the weight of history in her palm. As she stepped back into the operations center, she saw Wilson and his team waiting. Their eyes held something new when they looked at her. Not just respect, but understanding. They had seen who she truly was, and they were ready to follow her. "Dr. Blackwood," Wilson said formally, then smiled slightly. "Or should I say Phantom Sierra?" Sarah adjusted her glasses, the nervous gesture of the medic balanced against the cold precision of the sniper. 2 sides of the same coin, 2 parts of the same woman. "Just Sarah will do," she replied. "Now let's go stop Zakayev before he can use that device." Davis, his leg bandaged but insisting on joining the mission, nodded toward her with newfound respect. "Never thought I'd say this, but I'm damn glad they saddled us with a medic on this op." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. "My father taught me that." "So did Bill Morgan." Wilson checked his watch. "We've got less than 6 hours before Zakayev reaches his target. Helicopters are waiting." As they moved toward the landing zone, Sarah felt the weight of the special round in her pocket. 1 bullet. 1 chance to complete what her father and Wild Bill had started decades ago during the Cold War. She thought of her 7 years as just Dr. Blackwood, trying to save lives instead of taking them. She didn't regret those years. They had taught her the value of what she was now fighting to protect. But as she boarded the helicopter with her rifle case in hand, Sarah knew she had been fooling herself. You can change your name, your occupation, even your beliefs. But deep down, some things remain constant. Sometimes the world needs healers, but sometimes it needs protectors who can end threats before they begin. The Roosevelt Dam loomed against the night sky, its massive concrete face reflecting moonlight. Sarah lay prone on a ridgeline 1,900 meters away. at the extreme edge of effective range, even for the TAC 338. Wind gusted unpredictably through the canyon, creating swirling eddies that would challenge even the most skilled sniper. Wilson and his team had intercepted Zakhaev's convoy, engaging his security forces in a fierce firefight near the base of the dam. But Zakhaev himself had escaped the initial assault, working his way toward the dam's control center with the nuclear device. Sarah tracked him through her scope, watching as he limped toward his objective, his shoulder still bleeding from her earlier shot. At this distance, with these wind conditions, hitting a moving target would be nearly impossible for most snipers. But Sarah Blackwood wasn't most snipers. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate drop to a steady 50 beats per minute. She calculated distance, windage, bullet drop, the Coriolis effect, air density, 1,000 variables processed in seconds through both mathematics and instinct. As her finger tensed on the trigger, Sarah felt a strange sense of destiny. 3 generations of snipers, 3 decades of pursuit, all converging on this single moment. She squeezed the trigger. The custom round, her father's round, left the barrel at 3,000 feet per second. It cut through swirling winds, maintaining its trajectory against all odds, traveling the better part of a mile in less than 2 seconds. Zakhaev must have sensed something at the last moment. He turned, his eyes widening as if he could see death approaching across the vast distance. The bullet struck him precisely in the center of his chest. He looked down in something like surprise before collapsing beside the nuclear device he'd never get to use. Sarah exhaled slowly, lowering her rifle. Through her scope, she watched Delta operators secure the nuclear device and confirm Zakhaev's death. It was over. A circle closed after 35 years. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a quiet sense of completion. Her father could rest now. Wild Bill could finally lay down his burden. And perhaps, just perhaps, Sarah Blackwood could find a way to reconcile the healer and the warrior inside herself. 1 month later, in a private ceremony at the Pentagon, Sarah stood at attention as a general pinned a medal to her uniform, a medal without name or official record for a mission that would never appear in any public document. Wild Bill Morgan stood nearby, ramrod straight despite his 68 years, watching with unmistakable pride. When the ceremony concluded, he approached her with a slight limp, the old Afghanistan wound that had never quite healed. "Your father would be proud," he said simply. Sarah nodded, touching the medallion still around her neck. "I've been thinking about what happens next." "And?" Bill asked. "I'm staying with the unit," she replied, "as both a medic and whatever else they need me to be." Wilson, who had overheard as he approached, nodded in approval. "Best of both worlds. We could use someone who knows how to save lives as well as take them when necessary." Sarah adjusted her glasses, a gesture that now seemed to bridge both sides of her identity. "I spent 7 years running from who I really am. I thought I had to choose, healer or warrior, but maybe I can be both." "That's wisdom," Bill said, echoing the words he'd taught her decades ago. "Not just knowing when to use your gift, but knowing who you really are." As they walked from the ceremony, Davis, his leg healing but still using a cane, fell in beside her. "So, Doc, I've been wondering. That shot at the dam, 900 meters with unpredictable wind conditions. Did you know you'd make it?" Sarah thought for a moment before answering truthfully. "No, but I knew I had to try." "That's what makes you Phantom Sierra," Davis said with newfound respect. Sarah shook her head slightly. "No, that's what makes me Sarah Blackwood. The quiet ones are always watching, always calculating, always ready when they're needed most." In a world that loves to categorize people, Sarah Blackwood was a reminder that human beings are far more complex than their job titles suggest. The medic who handed out protein bars carried skills that could change the course of battles. The quiet woman at the back of formations possessed capabilities that existed in classified files most people would never see. Her story teaches us that heroism isn't about appearances or expectations. It's about choices made in impossible moments, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demand nothing less. Most importantly, Sarah's transformation from doctor to deadly protector and back again reminds us that we are not prisoners of our past abilities or experiences. We can choose who we want to be, moment by moment, decision by decision. But when the people we care about are in danger, sometimes we must reach back into ourselves and become who we need to be, regardless of who we thought we were. Wild Bill Morgan had always known this truth. Now Sarah knew it too. And somewhere in the mountains of a distant land, where American soldiers find themselves in desperate situations, whispers still circulate of a guardian angel who appears when all hope seems lost. A legend, a ghost, a healer who can kill with impossible precision when the situation demands it. They call her Phantom Sierra.